Alright people, we gotta talk about Traum. You know, just going by the way that they laid things out, it is a session where we're shifting back over into the arc of singularities rather than a lost belt. And that's a huge difference between what I've noticed out of what we're getting out of part 2 as opposed to part 1. When we were doing part 1, everything was following the strict model of being, it's a singularity. It's a mobile singularity, but that's as far as it goes. Once you get into part 2, we're doing a lost belt here, we're doing a singularity there, things that are noted to be somewhere in between. It's interesting the way that they bounce back and forth between the two in order to get the story off. And for good reason, because we know they're both primed to do certain things that the other one doesn't necessarily prioritize. In the case of the Traum singularity, I gotta say it was a really dope chapter, man. And this is coming in not expecting really too much of anything. As a matter of fact, I thought that it was just going to be okay. Mind you that I do in fact duck spoilers like the plague, so I only knew of certain things here and there about the chapter that was kind of previously exposed before it even came out. Like, I already knew about Sherlock. Unfortunately, when it came out years ago, I couldn't run from it. Amazing reveal anyway, regardless, we'll get to that. But the idea is that even with me knowing that, even with me knowing, you know, some of the lineup, there was a lot of people that I didn't know was gonna be there, or I forgot, and it worked in my favor. And that's the huge thing here. Everything that the chapter tried to go for, it did really well and to a T, whether it be the military strategy between these three different realms, Vlad finally getting his shine, the introduction of Creamhill and her being with Siegfried, Constantine. Johanna was kind of weird, somewhat. I'm kind of in and out with her being there and what she decided to do when she got there, but it was more good than bad. It's not a deal. Ultimately, there's so much going on, man. Like Charlemagne doing his reveal and him going through with us in the chapter as Seton. I'm rearranging the name, trying to figure out what it means. I'm like, okay, I give up. Whatever happens, happens. I'm gonna figure it out later on. And then of course he does the reveal. I'm like, oh, okay. And everything kind of just started to fall together with all the other characters being present, which, like I said, I didn't even know they were going to be there. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to do that much because of the way that he was summoned, that being a chain summon. And now that that's been brought back up, I kind of want to do a whole topic on that. There's a slew of topics that we need to cover now that the chapter has addressed so much. We've seen chain summons in the past. You know, it's not uncommon that a servant will spring forth because a lot of other ones like them are present, but never in the way that they brought Charlemagne to us. And specifically in his design of him having such level of power, but he only has so long to use it, or he's constrained to the amount that he can use. Looking at the basis for Traum in its entirety, you know, I got a lot of feels that was later on confirmed. Just by the design, it felt like real Extella-esque. And when Charlemagne got to talking about his design, and he's pretty much the combination of the myth Charlemagne and the real Charlemagne, Karl the Globe, but the myth Charlemagne taking priority and Karl kind of lending him his powers, which again goes into a nod of the events that were going down in Extella for not just those two characters, but these territories vying for independence, everybody building up these armies, trying to figure out who to recruit, who to put where. All of that gives the same feel. So I feel like if you've been through Extella or just the extroverts in general, you probably would have really appreciated going through this chapter just from the jump. I mean, the very fact you got literally thousands of servants spread out between all these different territories, and even though they're nameless, they're all the nameless heroes that didn't get recognized, they're not anything to play with. You know, up until this point, we've had plenty of entities that are servant level, even if they aren't actually that. And here you have all of these guys being plunged into this big war with each other. Creamhill, Constantine, Dawn, and now Ritsuka entering the fray to kind of hash things out and figure out a way to stabilize everything that's been going on. And by the way, I had no idea that Ritsuka was going to rule in the chapter. That threw me off so hard because, you know, we just did the video about Ritsuka being a servant, but that was before I finished the chapter. I was entertaining the idea of him being a ruler just because of everything he had done up until this point in time. I didn't think the dude actually ruled in the story. I'm like, well, there it is right there. That's even more of a reason for him to serve that spot. The man canonically ruled in the story. And I don't think that's just there for the sake of being there either. And the more I looked at his position and the timing for him doing this, it all makes so much sense. You know, coming around from LB6 where he had to go through the Garden of Lost Will and maintain his mental composure after that, all of these people constantly questioning him about him going through these chapters and how he feels about it or how he doesn't feel about it, and ends up having to crush them anyway. Same thing goes for here. When he takes on the position for Dawn, he then serves that role officially that sort of puts everything that he's built upon throughout the story to the test. You know, he had a lot of help from Vlad, but still, between working with everything that he had, him giving heavy emphasis on his summonings, that taking a lot more priority than before, that's hard. And even while maintaining that position, still finding a way not to lose himself in the process. You know, I remember when they unlocked Siegfried and they had their conversation, which came back around to what Siegfried ended up doing by the end of the story, that being siding with Creamhill. And I said, bro, there's a lot of things that I don't go for in terms of these whacked out relationships that they try to force down everybody's throat literally every other chapter. But this has got to be one of the most organic moments of that happening. And it's rare because they try to force so many. You know, the introduction of Creamhill was great. Her methods and her logic behind what she was doing, it was funny. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I kind of get it in the sense that, you know, she sacrificed herself to continue on in his position, but still everything that she did on her own as a servant, as a leader, was on point. It's funny because I remember saying on the Siegfried video years ago when the channel first started, hey, this needs to be a servant. And you can see that all in the comments of that very video. And I remember her coming out on JP. Finally, there you have it. So I think she did everything that she needed to do. And as far as their relationship goes, again, I love seeing relationships like that are actually real. You know, people like Ryoma and his wife. Once again, and even bringing up Siegfried, you know, going against Tame and completely canceling out his moves. People like Vlad literally using his phantasm on himself so he doesn't have to be under Moriarty's influence, and then turning around and showing off his strategy later on in the chapter. People like Roland literally sacrificing himself, even though nobody's gonna remember what he did, which sucks, because I'm sitting there like, well, if he didn't do this, eventually we would have just lost, we would have died. Because it's like, there's no way they get that much further after burning their best resources, especially with Siegfried turning on them anyway. The thing about Astolfo was kind of, I'm glad Astolfo got some light. I thought it would have been something different. I really didn't like how involved Sherlock was in that, because it kind of makes it seem like he did all the work. I really want Astolfo to move on his own accord and in that moment find out something that he can do with his own resources. But the fact that Sherlock sets it up, because surprise, surprise, Sherlock can deduce literally anything at all. You're thinking it, Sherlock somehow guesses your exact thoughts, kind of takes away from that. So that one was a bit weird, but I'm glad for any Astolfo, Charlemagne, Paladin shine at all at this point. So I'm not going to take too much from it. Everybody did their thing. The people that usually don't do their thing did their thing. As a matter of fact, speaking of wasted service, I gotta be the one to say this, man, because this is getting out of hand. Bro, I understand that Kiyohime is an OG, right? She's a vanilla servant. She's one of the first servants that we met, literally. And for whatever reason, she gets implemented into the story and she ends up saving us. All of that is fine, but y'all have got to stop putting Kiyohime in stories just for the sake of putting her in stories, man. Realistically, you should just make a new version of Kiyohime altogether. There should have been another variant instead of using the same old one that we keep on getting, that for one should be in the story to begin with, and two, you didn't do her base form that much justice from the jump. So it's like, now it feels like you're just holding on to something and you won't let go. Like, bro, Anchin, you should have been brought Anchin into the story instead of this playing the role of, oh, I think Anchin's Rasuka. Just bring Anchin into the story and actually give Kiyohime a full character instead of having her as this plot device or comic relief like you did when you first introduced her. I remember, you know, the tit for tat she used to have with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth ended up getting 20 million forms. It's funny, when I was thinking about how Kiyohime has no other forms other than like Summer or something like that, which is also old as fuck. Elizabeth is over here with like 20 different forms. I'm like, bro, people complain about saber faces day in and day out, which is completely fine. They're not wrong. It's just the idea, how are you complaining about saber faces and Elizabeth has 20 different forms and Kiyohime has technically one, barring her summer? It just makes no sense. At least these saber faces, some of them are supposed to look alike. MHX is just Space Artoria. She's supposed to look the same. Morgan is Artoria's sister. They're supposed to look alike. They're family. Like, bro, what? Mordred, her child. They're supposed to look alike. Gray's her descendant. They're supposed to favor each other. Whatever. Once you get into people like OG Nero, she shouldn't have been a saber face. That's kind of just piggybacking off of people that lead with sex in order to check out a show or check out a servant. They knew that they were going to get clicks because a lot of people like Saber. Let's just give Saber a different outfit and call her something else. That's all that was. But man, it's so funny. All these characters getting new forms and different variants, and Kiyohime is stuck being Kiyohime once again. Glad to see her, but bro, you should have really did something with her like she should have been had, instead of randomly throwing her in like you are now. And speaking of just randomly throwing in characters, right? Now, you know it's centered around these nameless heroes, right? These nameless servants. And you know what's so funny? And I hate that I'm the one that have to admit this because I feel like they already shoehorn him into too much stuff already, but Emiya, do you not know that Emiya is literally the embodiment of nameless heroes and he doesn't even get a mention? I'm like, what the fuck? All the times that y'all try to shoehorn Shiro or Emiya in as a servant into anything else, the only time, one of the few times where it makes sense, at least to bring up his name, and you don't bring him up. Huh? I'm like, yo, this is ass backwards. This has been a thing since the OG novel came out in 04. What is going on? I was so shocked to not even see, not pay a nod to his character. That's so strange to me. But whatever, man. It was so good anyway that it's not a big deal. I just thought there wouldn't have been a perfect place to put him, as he is literally the embodiment of that. What do you think nameless comes from? The nameless hero that stands in the stead of all the other nameless heroes. That's insane. But there's a lot of nuance to this, man. I mean, even down to the fact that these so-called servants have different grades and levels to what they can do throughout the story, or how much of a threat they actually are, as opposed to one that's summoned as a full servant with their name. The phantom grade, the heroic grade, so on and so forth. You can tell between that and the military tactics, the numbers, people being on the rear guard, the vanguard, the middle, Don Quixote playing his part as the fake Carl before, Ritsuka takes on that mantle. All of that was super dope. I'm actually in shock at how good that was. I think Don Quixote, he played a really great role. And another thing that I really liked about him, and he's not the only one, is the callbacks that were made all the way back to LB5, finding out that he was present there. I'm like, yo, he was there? And that's why we gotta get an anime for this, bro. Now that I know Don was there, I'm envisioning Don seeing everything that's going down. And he was probably like, man, I gotta get the fuck up. He probably, yo, he seen Muramasa, Rasputin, man, they out there tearing that ass up. He was like, you know what? Y'all got it. I didn't see nothing that happened. Bounced. That is so funny, bro. When they finally do the Lost Belts, I really hope they keep them in order, because it's not like the first time around where the first part of the story you can say is skippable. The Lost Belts have been good since the prologue. Let's be completely honest. All of them. They may have things that could have been better in some of them, but they're all at least decent. But yeah, the way Sancho stood up for Don is very reminiscent of the cream-heeled Siegfried situation. I'm like, bro, you gotta realize how real Siegfried was for doing what he did. Because it ain't like he just betrayed Ritsuka. It's not like he didn't know. No, he pulled Ritsuka to the side and say, hey, bro, I'm just gonna let you know right now, you know my background, this is my girl. If it ever gets to this point, I gotta side with my girl. And Ritsuka, that was real on his part as well. He was completely fine with that. He knew what was finna go down. So you can't hate on that, man. So the Kadok situation, and this is some of the first times that we're seeing this for a long time, back since LB1, I'm really fond of, because it's bringing an entirely different dynamic to the story, especially since he's a lot different from Ritsuka in the way that he operates with certain things. Even at the beginning of the chapter, when Ritsuka is trying to give him advice. Ritsuka's like, well, why don't you do this? Bitch, why don't you not take my spot? How about that? And you know, everybody's kind of holding insecurity within themselves for not being enough. That's also not an uncommon thing. In Kadok's case, now that he's not doing what he was motioned to do from the beginning of the story, I feel like he's a little bit lost, but he also knows that he's made it too far for it to be for nothing. So it's interesting to see him pull himself together in any way possible, even if that means he's sort of at odds with our protagonist, which realistically, I don't know how long that's gonna last, because you know, they never commit to hardly anything. Eventually he's probably gonna like Ritsuka like everything else, you know. He kind of should be that way, you know. You don't want a flat character that's just like, oh, I hate everything all the time. But at the same time, it's like, it's also nice to have somebody that's actually consistent with their perspective and not just like bounce back and forth at the drop of a pebble. And that's very, very often the case with characters out of FGO. You know, Ritsuka with the EX Traum meter, he's gonna get everybody eventually. It's just a matter of time. You can especially see that this is already coming around when you have people like V coming back into the fray, which that's another thing that I had no idea about at all. And I thought it was actually really good to know that V can do what I would say is some pretty broken things as far as canceling out fate, saving Kadok, transferring Mystic Eyes to Siegfried. I'm like, yo, what? This kind of ups the scale for some of what Mystic Eyes can do in general. And also, like I was thinking about when I first saw it, kind of leads to some more speculatory topics where other servants might be able to have Mystic Eyes and what we can get out of that. But that might have just been a very defined situation. Either way, it was cool to see them kind of mess around with that, especially in some fake content. You know, usually when we get Mystic Eyes stuff, it's either not heavily pronounced in Fate, or if it is heavily pronounced, it's in other Type Moon works more so, which is natural. That's where it comes from. Psychic ability, so on and so forth. It's just the idea, we don't get to see that in Fate so often. Before I get off into the next thing, what makes a lot of this so good is that I didn't know most of it was coming, and that's why I'm so into not being spoiled, because you guys gotta understand, I'm from a different era, man. Coming up, there was no spoilers. Now, like I mentioned before, they spoil the whole story, not just pieces or fragments of the story. No, the whole story 2-3 years ahead of the time. And this isn't just for Fate, this is just in general. This is a common thing now. And back then, man, it was like, bro, if you wasn't in front of that TV when that shit aired, you just wasn't gonna see it. And that's the way it was. There was no, oh, I'm gonna feed you this information, I'm gonna feed you these. You know, me in particular, I didn't have TiVo, DVR, or anything like that. So if a show came on at 7 o'clock, if I wasn't there at 7 o'clock, I was just asked out. But that's what makes it so much better. It makes you real enveloped in the experience. It makes it feel more whole, like it's supposed to be. You know, even with things like, you know, now you get a whole season at a time. That was never a thing. One episode and you gotta wait a whole week until the next one. That was the model. But I'm excited to see what they bring back around with the things that they did with this story, because there's just so many ideas at play here. You know, Jue, I was really impressed and surprised at how much respect that they're giving to his character as a Shion, because you got to remember, Shion Immortals, and we've been through that with people like you, they're unearthly. And so him having these alter egos and him constantly recreating himself, I already knew when there was some speculation to him not being truly gone, I was like, yep, he's still alive. But for him to do it over and over again, and for him to have a plan of the way that he did his memories because he knew that this was going to occur, I'm like, yo, you know how much crazy things can be done with this character? I mean, the Singularity speaks for itself. He is the reason for the entire Traum Singularity. And while we're here, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's go ahead and get into it, man. You know, we already did a whole video about this a while back. It's been too long. Specimen E. Specimen E. Finally, I did somewhat know that Specimen E was coming. I didn't know it was this chapter. I just knew he was coming. So that was kind of already in the air, but it was dope to see it real time. Regardless, good ideas are just good ideas anyway. The fact that Specimen Specimen E, as a master, has essentially used Yue to create this entire singularity is baffling once you think about all the things that went down. And it really goes to show a lot of things. This kind of goes back into things that were rooted at the very beginning of the bleaching of the planet. David, Blue Book, going on his journey and then going all the way into Area 51. And he, spoke about how once he got down there, it felt like he was kind of going into a different world, almost as if the hallway was alive. I remember it vividly. And they were kind of saying the same things here, like it's some type of alternate dimension wherever Specimen E is present. And of course, the cosmic being came in behind David Blue Book and it cut it short. And this is really the biggest thing that we've gotten from that plot line since then, really. And man, what a plot line it was. But it's even nicer to see everything come together, man, like that they're not forgetting about things and they're really going to great lengths to add more nuance, not all at one time, but kind of just keep edging us on to keep us intrigued and keep the lore going. That's how you do good lore, to me. I mean, things like that. Things like, Dawn being back in LB5, things like Sherlock being summoned in London. First of all, Sherlock is one of the favorites, and that's not because he's put in front of my face all the time. I just like the embodiment of what his character stands for, even outside of Fate. The same thing goes for Moriarty. So when I seen Sherlock, I'm just hyped that Sherlock's there, and I'm just hyped that we're about to get some help. I'm not questioning why Sherlock is there at the time. So it kind of serves a further purpose to the overall story. Him being there, how meticulous the alien god is with the way that they're planning things out with the apostles that they're choosing is kind of insane when you think about it. I'm like, yo, you gotta consider these are some of the smartest characters that we have, right? Sherlock, Moriarty, we'll get to that. But it's just the idea, all of this was technically a part of the alien guy's plan, having him go with us to help deal with Goetia, just so they could do what they needed to do. Bro, that is masterful. I mean, it's a shame that they're gonna do all of that to get beat by the power of love anyway, but it's just the idea, how much effort was being put forth even way back in part 1 of the story, and still things coming back around and we're finding out just now. That's fire. A lot of these things deserve a video on their own. I mean, the alien god apostle thing has been taken up to new heights with the introduction of young Moriarty. It seems like anything with apostle attached to the name at this point is just bound to be interesting. The fact that he's able to use the god's authority to command fate to make his death cancelable or make harm to him cancelable in general, it's like, bro, what? Is that not cheap? But then I realized, once Sherlock was gone, everything started to crumble with it, so he wasn't going to keep that. But it's just the idea of him having it in the first place. You can just imagine the destruction that could be done. And even with the position that he's playing, he's kind of doing this thing where he's moving like Edmund, with him going into the dream realm and siphoning this data, but the other person is kind of still in the unknown. I remember him saying that he knows what Kadok knows already anyway. I guess he kind of serves as that placeholder for Koyanskaya now that we've kind of dealt with her, and now we have nobody to torture and troll us. So I feel like Moriarty may be that person to do such things. I don't know. Sherlock mentioned that he's kind of just getting his feet wet of being on the evil side of things at that point in his life, as opposed to his other version. But at the same time, it is still Moriarty. I'm not finna just say he's not subject to any question. I mean, look what happened to Sherlock. Even with the thing about him saying, well, my connection with the alien god is different. Yeah, we've heard it all before. You're sus, buddy. You're not getting your way out of this one. There's no way out of this one. You're done. Okay, something like that, man. Chapters like that, chapters like LB6 really makes that wait really worth it. And it's kind of one of those things where you feel like you finished a really good show. I don't know if anybody is like me, but I kind of hate speed running shows. That's why when I know if they're good, I go through them real slow, because once they're over, it's over, man. It's done with. So I don't want to get to the end and I feel like I wish I had more show to watch. I specifically remember doing that with stuff like Trigun and Code Geass. I blew through those animes so fast. There's so many of these animes, there are a dime a dozen, and they don't really say anything, and shows like that are truly the gems, truly the classics. You gotta really just take a step back to appreciate everything that's coming in. The involvement of the sharpshooter, her reason for being there. I feel like Zufu with her Taoist elements as a way to kind of counter the things that Jue was doing was really helpful and really made me think great of her character. Even down to the minute things, really impactful. I guess you could say Salone's position was kind of weird because they somewhat did the same thing with Kiyohime later on in the story. It's like, well, you kind of already did that with Salome, and even Salome being there was more of something that comes off as real plot devicey, but you know, Salome is Salome. She was there, she did what she was supposed to, she helped us out. I'm not mad, it's just like, whatever.